April's Leadership Live. Welcome everybody. And so we kind of go into why we we start with our why, which is the next slide, which is multiply. Yep, to multiply the blessings and opportunities that have been placed into our trust. And so we always start with our why, as we do with every Tuesday morning meeting, as well as here at Leadership Live. And then we go into our topics this year, and what's new this year. For Q1, we wrapped up, and that was for strengthening leadership foundations. And for that one, we had 29 participants who completed all 3 sessions. 8 of those were out in the field or remote. So I really do appreciate everyone who completed those 3 sessions and tuned in for Leadership Live. This morning, I went out and passed out the pins here in the office, and we'll also get your pins if you are remote or in the field. We'll get your pin mailed out to you. But going into Q2 and kicking off Q2, we're going to go focus on enhancing team dynamics. And for this month, April, we're going to kind of go over trust building in teams. And for that, we have Dr. Mishra, who is no stranger to these Leadership Lives. She's joined us quite a few times in the past and given us some really good content. So kind of going off to the next slide, we'll learn a little bit more about her and who she is and what she does at Campbell. So she's an associate professor at Campbell University. She's in the business department about marketing and leadership. She has a PhD from UNC and has worked with companies like Pepsi and General Motors. And she's also written books on leadership and help people discover their strengths. So she'll kind of go off and kind of tell us more about herself, as well as go into the topic this month. So Dr. Mishra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonio. It's nice to be with you all. I'm also I've got to be department chair this year at Campbell, so that's a lot of fun. And so the work I'm going to talk about today is based on all of these books that I've written with my late husband. We have been studying trust for many years in leadership and in teams. And so, the one thing that we all do often is work together in teams. So I want to talk about that today, and I'm anxious to hear your questions and your comments as well. So one of the reasons that it's been parodied about trust and teamwork is that it's as you all know, it's not always easy. There are some obstacles sometimes, and as for the pointy-haired boss, he just didn't even know which way to fall. I will tell you, I've done lots of different trust workshops. I've never done the trust fall with people because I've just heard horror stories about how it doesn't really go very well. So there's lots of other ways that we can build trust without the trust fall. But I don't know if you've heard of Patrick Lencioni, but he has written a great book on teams as well. And he really identifies trust being at the heart of a functioning team. And so I'm sure, I'd love to hear about your experience as well. I'm sure you know that if you can get your team to that point, it really can make a huge difference in what you're doing. So just so you know, all of this that I'm going to talk about is based on lots of research over the years. My husband and I both did dissertations that included trust. We've interviewed hundreds of leaders. We've surveyed employees in lots of different industries. I even did an experiment in grad school when I went back to get my PhD on trust. And so just so you know, it's all research based. So one of the things I just wanted to start with as a little background is how we define trust. And we're going to actually get to define trust as a group in a little bit. But one of the things that we were intrigued about, we both started our careers at General Motors, and we definitely had some bosses that we jived with and others that were just, a little bit harder to get to know or to work with. And even on all the teams that we worked on, everybody was like, oh, I trust this person, I don't trust this person. But it really for us came down to, well, we need to really understand like what is trust and what do people say about it. And so based on all of that research, we found 4 key dimensions that people kept coming back to over and over again. And so we call it the rock of trust. And those dimensions are reliability. So can somebody count on you? To come to a meeting, answer an email? Are you open and honest? Are you the kind of person who willingly shares information with others? Can people see your competence? Do they have confidence in you that you can actually get the job done? And then the last one is compassion. I was actually talking with my leadership class this morning because we've gotten criticized over the years for using compassion instead of concern because it's kind of squishy. But it's one of the things that for us, and I hope that I think you're an audience that will appreciate this. That, compassion is really describes more of the kind of leader that we love, right? The one that cares about us, the one that is looking out for our best interests. And so that's why we have been fighting this battle for years with different people who review our work and saying, no, we really think it's compassion. And then undergirding all of that, we have four pillars that help these trustworthy leaders have this ability. And the first one is empathy, which really relates to that compassion part, because if you're not able to understand the feelings and thoughts of other people and put yourself in their shoes, it's very hard to lead them, to work with them, to even help them. And so empathy is a huge thing. And this is another thing we could talk about. There's always a debate. Can you teach empathy? Are you born with it? I always try to teach it. Not, we can ask my students how successful I am on that. Then authenticity is just being who you are, embracing your strengths, and being authentic in the way that you deal with people. I once had a boss who, because there weren't that many women in our company, she felt like instead of being herself, she felt like she had to act like her bosses all the time. And so that was kind of a struggle to always get her to come back and say, no, we want you to be who you authentically are. That's important to us. Courage to be who you are, to embrace new opportunities, and finally humility, which really helps us know like what are we good at and what are we not. So the example that I will talk about a few times is the best boss that we never had at General Motors. We met him after we left. His name is Bob Lintz, and he ran a stamping plant in right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And he had 5,000 people working for him. So he had the humility to walk around the plant and say, okay, I don't understand your job, but how can I help you do better? So that's just an example of how you would do that. One of the things that Amy Edmondson, she's a professor at Harvard, and she's written about this idea of psychological safety and how this factors into whether or not we trust our leaders or not. And I love the different attributes that she talks about. So listening, that's always something that I try to teach whenever I'm working on a project with a team, because it's really easy to not listen, isn't it? We get so absorbed by ourselves and what's going on in the world. But if you find those people who actually, will listen to you no matter the day or the time of the day or night, and will actually pay attention to what your issues are, that goes a long way to building that psychological safety, or that feeling that I can say what I need to say without fear of retribution, or, there might be pushback. I like to say it's learning how to disagree agreeably, basically. Um, the next part is competence, which I've touched on. So, when you know that your boss or your team member is able to do the job and has that ability to listen, then we feel a little bit more safe in sharing our perspectives with them. And then, of course, transparency is critical, because if somebody's transparent with us, then we feel like we can be more transparent back. So I would love to know, stop for just a second, asked, based on these three things, is there one for you that's been more effective? Or, and you can jump in the chat, or you can unmute, whichever you would like to do. Anybody have any experience based on these three?
Dr. Mishra, I think obviously you got competence there, the
Yeah.
transparency and listening. I'm kind of drawing myself back to Stephen M. R. Covey's work in Speed of Trust about competence and character.
Yes.
So where does the character piece come into this particular equation? Because even though someone is indeed very competent, and maybe they're listening and maybe they're even transparent, do I trust their character, or do I have confidence in their character? So how would you add that dimension to these three?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there, just so you know, there is an entire network. We call it the First International Network on Trust. There's a ton of people doing research on trust. And so one of them talks about integrity as being that sense of the person's character. My husband and I always like to think of the compassion part is, if you're able to express that, then it's a really good indication of your character as well. Can you understand what somebody's going through? And you're right, in this, it doesn't, these are the dimensions, but it doesn't address character. I think what we would probably infer is that if you're somebody who listens and is transparent both, that gives us some indications of your character. What would you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there are other pieces that tend to then be the foundational or the ingredients towards character, and listening and transparency are probably one of them, right? If you're listening, there's a sense of caring, there's a sense of curiosity, there's a
Yeah.
sense of learning, which then kind of goes to the humility,
Mm-hmm.
which which I then have a question. I don't want to derail this too much, but you
Yeah.
mentioned in your definition of humility accepting what we can and cannot do. Do you have to accept, or can you be humble to say, wow, I'm not good at that right now, but I need to get better at it? Maybe it's speaking, maybe it's a delivery of a service. So there's this aspect that you can get better. You are humbled by the situation, but I wouldn't accept that that is where I want to be unless, obviously I don't have the abilities, but I had a little question around acceptance, the word
Yeah.
accept in that definition of humility.
Well, I think sometimes acceptance is more of recognition. Maybe that would be a better word, because I think a lot of times, whenever we're leading a team or, leading other people, we think, oh, well, of course I can do this because I'm the leader.
Correct.
But one of the things that this General Motors leader taught us is that, and I'm also a Gallup certified strengths coach, so I'm a big proponent of us focusing on our strengths rather than trying to fix our weaknesses if they're too far gone. But one of the things Bob really taught us is, look, he's like, I'm running this plant of 5,000 people. It doesn't mean I can do every person's job. So I can try to learn and I can try to help, but I need to accept, like, here's the limitations of what I can do just by virtue of the fact I'm one person and, there's 5,000 other people who know their job better than I do. So I think
Yeah,
it's
I agree. I
recognize.
I respond to awareness or words of that effect that says, "Ooh, yeah, I just got humbled. I need to I have some humility right now." And it's all about that awareness or the recognition, as you mentioned. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think sometimes it's just honestly, I know, so we followed Bob around for a year doing a case study on him before we put him in our book. And we interviewed 30 of his employees from all different parts of the organization. And the thing that they loved about him, and were like the union even gave up some of their overtime pay because he convinced them, look, if we want to keep this plant open long term, here are the sacrifices all of us have to make. And so he really taught us that, you know, I can't do everything here, but I can at least empower and help people to do the best of what they want to do. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Does anybody else have a comment about this? Okay, we can come back to it if you think of something. So I'm
Dr.
just,
Mishra, I am
yes,
struck by competence being in the middle. 'Cause I feel
okay.
like, I feel like even if you're transparent and you listen real well, if you're incompetent, it's tough to build a lot of trust.
Yes, well, thank you for that because so my um, late husband and I had lots of different debates about what order to put these all in. So when he did his dissertation, he started with competence and he called it the crock of trust. And so honestly, it was, I've been in marketing and taught marketing forever. I was like, we can't call it the crock of trust. Nobody will listen to this. So we rearranged the letters. So that's actually how competence got there. But he and I would always have this debate, is it competence or reliability? Because I personally feel like I can show you my reliability before you even know if I'm competent. But I get your point. At some point, people want to know, can you actually do this job? So yes, thank you for that. So I'm just going to briefly share a few leaders that that have helped us shape our thinking around these. So I don't know if you've all heard of the company Two Men in a Truck. They were a family-owned company, just recently sold to ServiceMaster, but this is Melanie, who was in my husband's high school class. So she always liked to joke that she was the cheerleader and he was the nerd, but they were great friends. But she actually took over Two Men in a Truck when her mom got asked to run for office. And one of the things she found is that her mother sold the first franchises to friends, and they stopped paying royalties because they were like, well, we're your friends. We don't need to pay you royalties. But the whole basis of a franchise system is it's not going to exist without the royalties. So the first thing Melanie did, she got a nickname, the Melanator, is she came in and she got everybody to start paying the royalties. I mean, even if she had to sue them, because she said, we'll never grow as a company if we don't, if you don't fulfill your contract. She's always fun to think about in that regard. Ted Castle, if you've ever had Ben and Jerry's cookie dough, then Ted Castle is responsible. His company makes all the cookie dough for Ben and Jerry's. It's called Rhino Foods. And the thing that we've known Ted forever, and the way that we appreciate what he does is he was actually, it's a family-owned company, but he opened his books to his employees because sometimes they would throw out batches of cookie dough. And he said, and they're like, oh, Ted, you're rich. It doesn't matter how much it is. He says, no, 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 you don't understand. This is money I can't reinvest in the company. So he opened his books, walked them all through how they make their money, and then gave them some bonuses based on how well they did in making profits for the company. So he got them to, he shared the books and then shared the profits too. And then, as I mentioned, Bob, he's kind of our competence and compassion person, because obviously he wouldn't be running a plant of 5,000 people if he wasn't competent at his job. And he actually stayed there for 25 years because he wanted to see the plant exceed his expectations. And now they're the #1 in quality stamping plant for General Motors. But he did some other things that were on the compassion side. Like he said, no more executive cafeteria. We're not going to wear suits anymore. Because those are distinctions as well. So he did some things to just try to change the culture as well, in order to get them to be more competent as a culture, if that makes sense. So any questions before I move on? Okay. And Jay, will you let me know if you hear any that I don't see in the chat? Thanks. So team trust, and this comes back to a great book on teams called The Wisdom of Teams. And I love their definition because it kind of encapsulates the things that we should be thinking about as a team, right? Probably a small group of people. We all have skills that work together. We have a common purpose or goal, and then we hold ourselves accountable. And I think we could probably have issue with all of those different components sometimes, depending on the team we're in. But their idea is this is the ideal if we can get ourselves to be all of this. But of course, as you all know, sometimes we don't have history with people. So to just jump in and just trust that we're going to trust other people, that's not always easy. We also have our own ideas of what trust means to us. So, even though we narrowed it down to 4, you can break those apart into lots of different pieces. And then sometimes people are rewarded based on their own work, not the teamwork. And then you have the kind of these conflicts that occur. And so, or maybe there's no incentive to share information. One of the big things is that we don't let ourselves, getting back to that psychological safety part, we're not trained to give each other feedback in a positive or constructive way. And so then we don't do it if we don't know how to do it or we're worried about doing it. Conflict management, when I was talking to my undergrad leadership class, that was the one thing that they wish they all knew how to do better, because they know they're going to have to do that at work. And then, as I mentioned, conflicting goals. So some research has found that the leader, whether it's a leader of the team or the leader of the organization who then empowers that team, can really have a great impact on whether or not that team will have trust. Because, if they are giving the face time or the purposeful time with the group and saying, here's your task, here's what I'm expecting, here's the resources I can provide, all of those different things really help that team feel like, okay, this is important to this person, it's going to be important to us. And there's just different ways that you can, build kind of that trusting culture in teams too, and the leader can kind of set that example. But one of the other things that I just like to mention is that when you're in a team, you can be a leader without the title. I've learned this over and over again in my own roles. So before I became a professor, I was responsible for 19 plants that worked with Pepsi. But the thing is, I was responsible for them, but I had I could not tell them what to do because they didn't report to me. So it was a really great lesson for me on using the power of gratitude. Every time I'd visit a plant, I would write them a thank you note and say, thank you for this and this and this and all the ways that you support our company and Pepsi. And a lot of people told me they'd never had a thank you note from anybody ever. But for me, it was the only thing that I had power to do to really build trust with people, to call out their strengths, and to help them learn how to share their expertise with each other, with our client. And so there's a lot of things that you can do, even if that's not your title. One of the other research that's been done on high versus low trust teams is that these teams that trust more really share their knowledge. They have that competence, and they know how to share it. They don't just hoard it, or they don't, rely on just one person to lead. And so they'll rotate that leadership in the team based on, okay, who is the expert in this, or who's the expert in this? So maybe today I'll lead the team meeting because this is my area of expertise, but maybe you'll lead it tomorrow. And that way, it's all based on more of the competence and our goal orientation, as opposed to, oh, are you my boss, or you have a higher level in a different team? And then as a result, low trust teams are kind of the opposite, right? They have conflicts over things that maybe don't matter as much to the goal that they're working on, and lots of misunderstandings. And so it's all about trying to bring people together. So I have just one example I want to share with you. My neighbor was the head of e-commerce for Lenovo, and he had all these teams all over the world. But one of the things that he found was his US team was not really good at delegating tasks in other places, because they just didn't know, can these people even do it? What's their training and their background? Are they going to take my jobs if we outsource to a different country? And so finally, he realized that they weren't making the progress he wanted. So he took his entire US team to Argentina and said, okay, we're all going to spend time together, get to know each other. And as a result of that, the team came back and said, oh my gosh, those people are so smart. Why haven't we been giving them assignments? Which is what he was hoping for. But he recognized that sometimes, that FaceTime with people really does help. So I think that's kind of a challenge if we're not face to face with people, but there's probably ways that we can work on that as well. So one of the things I know that you all deal with is having teams that come together very quickly for a specific purpose or process. And there's actually a term for that. Deb Meyerson, that's what she did her dissertation on, was swift trust. And it's really looking at all those kinds of teams that come together quickly, and how do they build that trust very quickly with each other? Because there is usually in those situations, we don't necessarily all know what the expectations when we jump into them. There's a little bit of risk. We're kind of uncertain of where we're going or who we're working with. And so I love that she came up with this name. So they're temporary groups who have just a short lifespan, but they all know what the purpose is, usually highly complex tasks, fast deadlines. And the people who are chosen, it's because they have an expertise that the group needs. So lots of people have been building on her idea of swift trust, and realize that, as that e-commerce team I mentioned, the more we disclose with each other, hey, this is my area of expertise, or hey, this is what I can do, then we rely on that and in order to build that trust as a team. So there's lots of different kinds of swift trust teams. I actually took a whole class on teams when I was in my PhD program, and it was really fun to think about all the different ones that pop together. Have you ever thought about that? You get on a plane, those people may have not ever met each other before. You go to the emergency room, whoever is on, call that time, or if they need a specialty, they bring a specialist in. And so a lot of these teams form very quickly. And so they have to figure out how to talk together quickly, how to have common communication, but also keep it based on, whatever the project or task is. So for you all, I'm curious on how you think you can build trust quickly in a short-term team. Some of the research shows that if we have this thing called a propensity trust, so some of us are just generally more trusting and some of us are a little bit more hesitant. Are you willing to show your face like you all are today in a virtual setting? I can tell you when I teach undergrads, I have to, twist arms to get them to show their face because, they're still like, who are you and why are we here and who are these other people? And then do you value the expertise of others? So what are some other things that you do with a short-term team?
I think it's important to quickly establish purpose. In the previous two slides back is the fighting amongst the teams. And to me, a lot of the ways to spot when you start throwing back and forth at each other is you failed to fully establish why we're here. And so the quicker you can get a team a purpose, then they can start evaluating your competency. You can build the others. But if there's no purpose, then it's kind of a open field, which is tough to play in.
Yeah, that's a great point because then at least everybody's focused on the same objective. Yeah, that's definitely important. Thank you.
David Bosniak in the chat wrote icebreakers as a quick way to get to know your team.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because sometimes, we might find out, hey, I have a dog. Do you have a dog? Or I like the beach. Do you like the beach? And, oh no, I like the mountains. It can be all kinds of different icebreakers. Yeah, those are always very helpful. I love when people do that as a way to so you can just get to know each other. Yeah, that's a great thing. Anybody else?
I would say that out in the field, especially assigning tasks and giving the goals of the shift, where you're go ahead and project forward of what the goals for that evening are, what that shift end result is,
Yeah.
establishes, where the team's going and trust and that you're going to actually get there with the whole team.
Yes. Yeah, that is excellent. That reminds me of we were doing some work with Balfour, their restoration company. And so we always like to interview people before we do the work, the consulting or workshop. And they actually have these very fast forming teams in natural disaster areas, but they said that is what they were missing in their teams because they were so decentralized. They're like, oh, you people are all here, go to Western North Carolina. But then they would get there and go, well, what am I supposed to do? So that's a great point. You have to give people direction too, or know why you're there and what you're going to contribute.
And it's along, Dr. Mishra, it's all along with that natural direction. So if you can, you mentioned the difficulty of not knowing the expectations because it's a new team. But something that goes to establishing expectations is a definition of standards. That kind of goes to the purpose. It kind of goes a little bit to the goals that Meredith was talking about. Because in the military, obviously we operate across different branches of the military, but we have a common way of doing things. And because we have a common way, because that is the established standard, we are holding each other accountable to the expectation of that standard. We can develop trust and execute faster. It's only because we have defined what the environment is to start with. And people just by coming into the team have, in a way, chosen to be placed themselves against those standards or operate within those standards. But if we don't define them, if there's no expectation and the person is showing up, trust will take much longer to form because there's no foundational roots for it to grow upon.
That's a really great point. So then, everybody buying into the mission of the organization. So I love how you all remind each other at the beginning of this, because I think when people have that in mind, you're right, it's a lot easier to execute if you kind of have that common frame of reference. That's true. All right, well, if you think of something else, let me know. But when we combined all of our research and other people's research about great teams, so we kind of found that they not only use the rock of trust, so they can depend on each other, they have the open communication, they respect each other's competence and care about each other, but also the things, the one that you just spoke on, having common goals. That's really important. So everybody's on the same page. We know where we're going. We know it's important. But also as a result of that, respecting each other's competence, having that sense of a shared leadership. And so just research shows that great teams are that. So is there anything else anybody would add to that? I'm always
I don't
open
know if
to,
it's, I don't know if it's within the open communication, but open-mindedness, right? Not
yes,
being willing to see things differently.
yes, I love that. That's true because just because it's my way doesn't mean it's the right way. I'll give you an example of that. The plant manager, Bob, I was talking about, he decided to not be one of those people who would just like tell people what to do all the time, but his top management team, they would have meetings and he would say, okay, here's the problem we need to solve. What are all of your ideas? And he told us once that he would go into these meetings think, well, I'm the plant manager. I know everything. They're going to love my ideas. And many times they would come out with somebody else's idea that was better. And he would say, you're right, that's a better idea. We're going with it. But his rule was always whenever they left, they all had to be on the same page and agree that that was the best idea and not say, well, I had one that would have been better. Because he wanted them to kind of emulate that sense of trust and shared leadership for the rest of the organization. So, and that also takes a lot of humility, right? When you think, oh, I'm leading this team, I should have all the answers. Not necessarily. So yeah, I like that open-mindedness. That's great. Anything else anybody wants to share?
Dr. Fubara also added willingness to give each other the benefit of the doubt, as well as Tim Good saying sharing resources within our company with each other.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Dr. Fubara. Yeah, the benefit of the doubt, I mean, so one of my professors from graduate school, Kim Cameron, he writes on positive organizational communication. And so it's kind of that combination of forgiveness and gratitude kind of in the middle there where you're going, you know what, because you're here and I respect your expertise, yes, I am going to give you that benefit of the doubt and, not necessarily be upset the first time, but, kind of goes to that open-mindedness as well, right? Saying, you're here for a reason, going to see what's happens. And what was the second thing he said besides benefit of the doubt?
Tim Good mentioned sharing resources with each other within our company.
Yeah, yeah, that's excellent. And that kind of goes under the depending on each other's and the common goals. But yes, um, sharing resources is so important because, your team might have something that my team hasn't used yet or didn't know about, or maybe you know how to use some software that I don't. And so that's a good one to add too.
And we have one more that just came in. Beverly Voles said willingness to be accountable for your actions, not throwing anybody under the bus.
Yes, thank you, Beverly. That is, yes, I think that is actually one of the things. So I would love you all to tell me, but this is the one thing I remind my undergrads all the time is you have to show that you can be accountable when you go to work because that's kind of the first way that people can know that are you competent and are you reliable? Is if you're willing to be accountable for what you do and what your role is on that team. But I think it can be challenging sometimes for some people, especially if there isn't an agreement or some team norms around, are we going to hold each other accountable? And we're all willing to do that in each direction. So that's another way that we can do that. So yeah, I love that. Thank you. So I don't know if you all know about the Team Watson, how they all work together, but one of the interesting things on some teams is that, we're trained, especially I can tell you in academia, we are all trained to do our own thing. But then we sometimes have to come together and work together, which we love because at Campbell we have great people here. But for IBM, that wasn't the case. There were all these scientists who learned how to do scientist things, but their common goal was let's have Watson, the computer, beat Jeopardy. And so because of that, and I mean, it took them a while to get there, but they did finally reach that goal. So to me, that's kind of a fun example. One others I wanted to talk to you about, so getting back to the accountability. So one of the leaders that we interviewed as we were writing our books was Ross Smith at Microsoft, and he was leading two separate teams of 80 people. And so his whole thing was, I've got to get them to trust each other quickly because we're coming together. They worked on defect prevention. And so he created this way for everybody to add their input. I wish that the link was still working, but I think they might have made it private because I used to be able to show it to people. But they had a system where everybody could vote for what they think is the most important part of trust. And then the team said, look, whatever we agree, whatever's there, we're all agreeing to be accountable for that. So his story is the first time he walked in and had this conversation, they all looked at him and said, Ross, we love you, but we don't like when you're on your phone because it's very disrespectful to the rest of us when you are working, when we're supposed to be having a meeting. And he told me, he was very honest. He said, I was so taken aback by that because I'm thinking to myself, I'm the boss. I need to be on the phone. I have multiple teams. I got to see what's going on. But they really pushed back and said, no, it's really disrespectful. You need to put your phone down when you come in. So that's an indication that you're all in for us and you're not distracted by other things. So that's what really got him thinking about how to do this. So we're going to do our own kind of mini version. Ted Castle also does this with all of his employees all the time. We call it Ted's Trust Exercise. But after we started working with him, he started doing this at with his team at work. And so let's see if we can figure out here what are the most important priorities for all of you in terms of what does trust mean for you. So I've got a poll right there, and I'm going to see if you should be able to hit the QR code. And let me see if I can. I want to go back to this other one. Where am I? So can you all use the QR code from there, or do you need me to go to, let me see, I need to go to the other one anyway. So I want to.
Yeah, the QR code's not on the screen any longer. We're seeing it in the gallery.
Okay, can you see this now?
Not yet.
You're not seeing the QR code?
No, ma'am.
Oh, bummer. Okay, let me try again. Sorry. I literally was practicing this so I could get it right. And no? Yes?
I think you stopped sharing.
I think you have stopped sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So when you log in, it's going to ask you to sign in, but don't log in. Just say, I'm skipping that part, and just tell me your one word that means trust to you. So this is a word cloud, so we should be able to see the things that are duplicated will be larger words. Aha. This is great. Thank you for all your responses. Clarity, self-reflection. There's some new words here. Reliance, integrity. Self-reflection. That's not something we often have time to do, is it? Dependability. I love how this thing morphs too with all of your responses. So keep them coming. Secure. Excellent. Truth. Respect. Delegation. That's a new one. Truth. That is really interesting too. All right, as people are finishing that up, any reactions from anybody about this?
Yeah, Dr. Mishra, I'm going to geek out on one of your words and your rock of trust, right?
Yeah.
Reliability versus dependability, right?
Yes.
One to be counted on, the other one to deliver accurately. So why'd you decide on reliability versus dependability?
Well, that was based on my husband's initial dissertation and then kind of our subsequent research. And kind of thinking that the reliability, when we think of that, we do think of dependability as kind of being a synonym for that. But I can see what you're saying about that distinction of, you know, can you do it versus can you, show up and deliver it? And so I think that's kind of where that overlap of reliability and competence comes in, because if we can't rely on you to deliver, that's that dependability, right? So I think that's what that distinction is from. But thank
Doctor,
you.
where's based on transparency, being like the transparency can go too far, right? If we talk about building trust,
How so?
radical transparency in the limit can be very dangerous,
How so?
or at least rejected to some extent. So I'm interested, is there research or studies, or have you read if you go too far in transparency, you actually denigrate trust? Because sometimes letting people know how you really feel about them isn't effective if it's super negative.
That is a good point. Yeah, there actually is research on that, because, sometimes people might like tell you too much about whether it's their political views or whether it's their health problems or, whatever it is. Sometimes people are like, okay, well, that is like too much information for me. I don't know what to do with it or process it or how to have a conversation around it. But, that gets back to, I always tell the story when I teach listening is, when I taught at Penn State one Saturday, I had to run in and get just something off my desk. So my husband was waiting, and a half hour later, I came out and he's like, "Where have you been? I thought you were just grabbing something." Well, you know how we do this thing with people where we're like, "Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you?" It's kind of like it's a little superficial, but it's our way of greeting each other. And so I did this for a colleague who was there, and I'm like, "Hi, how are you?" She's like, "Terrible. My husband just left me for a secretary." So that was an example of too much transparency. And then what do I do with it? Like, I can't just say, "Oh, well, good to see you. Bye." Um, so, I mean, I was the kind of person who would sit and listen to her for a half hour and I'd let her cry and, try to be compassionate. But I think that's why sometimes we aren't quite as deep in our conversations, is because it can be too much. It can be overwhelming for people, and then they don't know what to do with it. Am I answering your question?
No, that's where I was going with it. Like the TMI concept seemed like it could be difficult. Like the
Yeah.
other ones make like a lot of sense, but a lot of people really felt strongly about that, and so I do wonder if that's a societal reflection in general about just lack of trust. And so what they really want is, because we've been in just different institutions across the way of, this lack of transparency has actually created this desire that we really want transparency to trust. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think people do crave it,
Or
but
in
I think
general.
you're right about the levels of it or the depth of it, especially on a personal level. I mean, that's why I always remind my undergrads also, before you go for an interview, like, go clean up your Instagram feed, because people want to know about you, but they don't want to know everything about you. And there might be a lot of things you don't want them to know about you. Um, But yeah, I think transparency is also I think of it as like sharing all the information I have, not withholding things, letting you know. And that's also important, right? If we want to finish whatever our task is. Um, yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think to stay on that topic a little bit, if you do, the more transparent you are, I think the more you have an obligation to follow up. So what I mean by that is, if you give all potential, Scott ran down all the risk of your project, they probably wouldn't move. Everyone would freak out. But if you're going to give risk and then switch to control what you can control, and here's the things we can do to impact outcome, if you add a step, the more transparent I think that you are, you better do a lot more. We cover that some with truth plus charity when we explain love. The more truth you give, you better follow it with some charity and some ways to mitigate those risks or shortfalls. So I do
Yeah.
think there's some Jamie's fitting on some risk around transparency.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right about the risk of transparency, whether, so on the personal part, it could be TMI, but on the professional part, the more I say, I want to fix this, then people are going to hold you accountable. Like, well, what are you going to do to fix it? What are the steps you're going to take? And what is it going to look like? And so I get that a lot from employees who say, I'm trying to have a conversation with my boss. I only know that they're listening if they take steps to fix whatever it is we talked about. So that kind of goes in there as well in terms of that importance of if I'm going to disclose or share or even a frustration, how do you handle it and what do you do with it? Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'm going to go back to our slides then. I'm going to see if I can do this and go to my PowerPoint. No, there we go.
There you go.
Did that work?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So thank you for all participating in that. That's fun to just see what trust means to everybody. And so the reason that I liked, you can do that whether you use poll everywhere or just even, when you're coming together as a new team, you can have everybody just write it down, talk with each other, see what the common phrases are. And then, so that was the accountability part is what Ross Smith at Microsoft did with his team. They all agreed that whatever was the kind of the top 5 to 10 items, every time they came into a meeting, everybody agreed, okay, if I'm not fulfilling these, you can call me out on it, which I don't hear a lot of organizations do that, but that's kind of that way of building in that transparency and accountability. Like, okay, we all see what it is. We all see what we want. Now, how are we going to make sure that we're living up to that? And then one of the other things that you can do with a new team is create some team norms around how you want, like, how will we communicate so that everybody is on the same page? And I always encourage teams to do this ahead of time, like how will you diffuse conflict when it comes rather than waiting until it arrives? And then what ways can people show their competence? Like you're going to excel in this part of the team, or I'm going to lead in this part of the team. And so that seems to help a lot to have those norms. So if we were to do this in a team, we would come up with the 5 best ways to build trust. It helps us learn about each other. But one of the things I want to talk about is, what about your existing teams? So what can we do to maintain trust with existing teams? One of the things that can happen and sometimes disrupt our culture of trust are external things that happen in the world, right? Like COVID kind of turned everything on its head and people are working from home and not together. But as we've talked about, being willing to ask those hard questions, and figuring out how to engage employees and support innovation. So Antonio, I want to be respectful of time, so you let me know when you want me to stop talking.
Yes,
But
ma'am. You're fine.
Okay. Does anybody have any ideas about like what you can do for the team you're on right now to maintain your level of trust?
I would say I would say reaching out, just see where you can help. If there's anything you can help with.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because sometimes people may not feel comfortable asking, but if you are the assertive one and says, okay, what can I do? Then somebody might say, oh, well, I do need help with this or this. So yeah, I love that. Were you going to say something, Antonio?
Yeah, I was just basically piggybacking off Jay. If you just be kind of proactive. So if you see something or if you see someone either struggling or, someone's not here that day and something should have been done or moved, even if it's as small as, taking the dishes out of the dishwasher and moving it in there, and just kind of stepping up and just kind of building that trust off and just being accountable and just being proactive. That kind of builds trust as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, Dr. Mishra, I think it also goes sort of that dichotomy between curiosity and judgment, right? If you use Covey's 6th habit, you'll seek first, understand, then to be understood, right? If you want to continue to foster trust within your team, be curious, ask for clarity, or even reacting in many cases. You know, the phrase "tell me more" can be very, very powerful.
True, and so
Just in
simple.
understanding and in connecting.
Yeah, actually, I always reflect on that. I got to see Dr. Covey in person when I was in grad school at Michigan. Amazing man. And that particular step, that I think is the hardest one. To seek to understand before you're understood means basically letting other people go first. And especially if you're diffusing conflict in a team, instead of you saying, well, I don't like this or this or this, you let other people go first. It's so against our human nature, I think, because we always want to like, well, but you know, this is why and this is why. But instead, stepping back and letting somebody else talk first, I think that's one of his hardest steps that's in there. It's very challenging because it takes a level of humility to just step back and listen first.
And there's that old adage, leaders speak last. So that
Yes.
you get the opinions of the group before you weigh in. Otherwise, you start tainting the opinions of others if you speak too soon.
Yeah.
As
Good
a leader.
point. Yeah. Very true. Yeah, unless you have that psychological safety where people can feel free to challenge you and say, okay, I agree on this, but have you thought about maybe, you know, tweaking this way? Yeah, it can be challenging. So one of the ways I wanted to just, so these are my two kids last Thanksgiving, but I just wanted to share an example of what a heart surgeon at a hospital here in North Carolina, he had an accident, so he couldn't be a heart surgeon anymore. He couldn't do the surgery, but he still worked in the heart lab. And so one of the things he did to kind of give his team a little trust adjustment, because he noticed everybody was kind of like they were doing their work, but it was very, you know, like clinical. It wasn't that personal, and he really wanted to build more personal touches with his team. So he started asking people to bring in pictures of their families and their dogs. So this is my dog Kona, and my daughter actually is a therapist and use her as an icebreaker all the time with little kids. And so I just wanted to share that as an example that, you know, sometimes it can just be something as simple as like, hey, let's all put our kid pictures or our pet pictures up here and, you know, talk about what we have in common. So I always love that the heart surgeon was the one who thought of this idea, because people are like, why are you doing this, Kevin? But he said it really worked with his team to kind of, you know, give them a little tune up. So it's also, we've talked about engagement at a previous session. So I won't spend a lot of time in this unless you all have questions, because I want to leave it open for questions too, if you have any. But engagement, that's a huge topic right now with Gallup. They've done a lot of research on how you can build engagement in your teams. And a lot of it is actually trust building kinds of things. And that combination of trust and psychological safety so that people feel like, wow, I'm prepared. I know what my goals are. I want to go above and beyond and do my job. And so I've got some ideas both for managers and for employees. And they're things that we've talked about already with the feedback and the listening and showing you care. And then from my professor at Michigan, showing gratitude, that's one of his big ones. But you can kind of do that, and you can do that whether you have the title of leader or not, right? You can sprinkle gratitude among people. Like I was describing what I had to do for our 19 Pepsi plants. So that's how I discovered that it was a very effective way. So I always like to think of trust tips as based on the rock of trust. So, you know, maybe for yourself, you can just think through what are all the ways that I can show people that I'm reliable? What are all the ways I can show them that I'm honest and open and transparent? How can I prove to them that I'm competent? And then what does compassion look like for me? Because I think the more authentic way that we deal with each other is to use our own strengths and to use what comes natural to us, and don't necessarily think we have to behave like other people if that's not really the way that we feel comfortable. So what questions do you all have for me in the time that we have left?
Dr. Mishra, what has or the research shown, if there's been research, I assume there has been, around trust with remote teams, right? We hear a lot
yes.
about, getting back to the office. We hear about the potential productivity gains from a remote workforce, but we also mention how important is that physical presence and that display of trust if you're not seeing people. So what's the research say about remote working and trust increases, decreases, things around that nature?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I taught at Michigan State for a couple of years, and there's a professor there who was doing this exact research because people were just started doing like computer teams, and he wanted to know, we didn't really call it remote then, but he was like, how do people work together when they don't see each other, they don't spend time together, they don't know each other? And so he did a series of research studies going from I only know your name to now I can see an avatar, now I can see your picture. And he, amazingly enough, did this between students in Israel and Palestine a long, long time ago, amazingly enough, as he was trying to, because he was from Israel, so he was trying to build trust in the region as well. And the very last step is he allowed people to come and visit in person, but he only had about half showed up. So this was over several years, but he showed the more that we do disclose with people, to go from like an avatar to our picture, then people are like, oh, okay, I know a little bit more about who you are. And try to do things remotely that would also encourage people to share a little bit more about them. Not to the TMI level, but, at least disclose like, this is who I am, this is important for me, this is my family or my pets or whatever. And so then the latest research has all been about what we can do as leaders to help people feel engaged even though they're remote, because there is that tendency to think, oh, I'm working at home, nobody cares about me. I will tell you, my son works for EY online. He was supposed to go into the office, but he got hired during COVID and they said, don't come to the office, just stay home. But he feels totally engaged with his team because they go out of their way to spend a little time getting to know him, and they mentor him and they develop him. So he feels like, even though he's remote, he still feels like completely part of the team. He had the opportunity to go visit his team in Tampa last month, and he said that kind of just sealed everything. It was only one time, and he'll probably only go once a quarter, but it was enough for him to feel like he was there. So there's a lot of companies who are looking at how do I make sure that to keep that connection and keep that culture going, even though I don't see them face to face every day. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think there's research ongoing on this area.
Well, I draw a distinction between engagement and trust, right? I can be engaged with a colleague, but not trust them, right?
Yeah.
I could be human. I can be, so trust for me as a former military person has a much different meaning.
I'm sure.
And personally, I don't know how you develop that unless you spend time in the firefight with them.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that becomes then the challenge of those Swift trust teams, right? Because unless we have like some common reference when we come together, we're a little bit hesitant, like, well, can you do this? Do you know about this? Are we able to, pool our resources, work together? That can be a challenge too. No, I totally get that distinction. Thank you. Anybody else?
So there's a quote, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. And I guess I know, and I don't think we covered it too much, but yeah, I guess when someone loses trust on a team, or in a sense of, not delivering or accomplishing what they say they're gonna do, how do you take the bias out of not, expecting like, okay, I don't trust them, I'm gonna do it myself or whatnot?
Yeah, I think that's where the psychological safety comes in, because hopefully if we've had this agreement up front, hey, we're going to keep each other accountable, then you could circle back around and say, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. Are there things getting in the way from you performing? So it could be a developmental kind of thing. But I think a lot of times, because we're all conflict avoiders, we don't do that. And that's where the problems come in.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
guess if there's not any more questions, I'll just keep myself unmuted and in the April Leadership Live. So I really do appreciate Dr. Mishra, and thank you for joining our April Leadership Live. And there's a big surprise, everybody. She'll be back next month for coaching and mentorship. So we're excited to have you back again next month this time. So really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your insight and your tools and topics on this topic. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining the April Leadership Live as well. So you guys have a great day.